time is no longer near. It is in fact here. The host is seated with Voxcaster prepped. The guests are ready with data slates and codexes in hand. Recorded on an undisclosed planet just outside the heart of the Imperium. Lock and load your bolters and sharpen your choppas. Stratagem is about to begin.
Welcome to Stratagem, your weekly Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar strategy podcast. This is where we break down the strategies that can help you take your tabletop wargaming to the next level. As a reminder, this podcast is created by a handful of people playing with toy soldiers in their basements, and our show is in no way affiliated with Games Workshop. All the opinions stated here are our own. This is Josh, and I'll be picking up the hosting duties while Andrea is out. Our topic this week is a debate between Hordes versus Behemoths in Age of Sigmar. We have two of our best local players, Nick and BJ, to help us look over some of the strongest of these unit types and deal out some pointers on how to use them to greatest effect. On a side note, we're testing some new recording and editing technology, so you may notice a bit of a change in our production value and the regularity of our releases as we settle into our new systems. This is your host, Josh, and I have with me
Nick Detbarn, your friendly neighborhood Stormcast Eternals player.
And BJD, your Corn player.
Welcome to the show, Nick and BJ. What are we talking about today?
Well, BJ and I heard there was a debate around our area about whether or not you should play Hordes or Behemoths and whether or not point costs were relevant. And with the new changes to the General's Handbook 2017, we thought it would be an interesting topic to explore.
That sounds excellent. I don't have a lot of experience with Age of Sigmar to begin with, and I haven't even looked at the General's Handbook, so I'm really excited to look into this.
So for this, we pretty much kind of decided we would take a few Horde units from each allegiance, and then a few units of Behemoths from each allegiance, and we would just kind of talk about them, and we would maybe do a quick summary of a few of the factions and talk about, you know what, Behemoths are more of a way to go, or you know what, Horde's the way to go.
Excellent. For the people that don't have any idea what we're talking about, what is a behemoth and what are we talking about when we're looking at hordes?
So for the most part, behemoths are the big models that you bring to the table. They may not necessarily be a leader. Sometimes you can have both a leader and a behemoth, but they're the big guys that cost 300, 400, 500 points and can really change the flow of a battle. For hordes, we considered it anything 30 models or more. There's a lot of elite units that stop at like 5 or 10, and horde units usually have lower save and all sorts of stuff like that.
So we're talking the garbage units, the chaff, the stuff that usually would get overlooked, but there are 100 of them, so they can suddenly become useful.
Yeah, and to add to that usefulness, it's with the General's Handbook 2017, what has made it really interesting is the horde discount. So that's why we thought this was an appropriate topic.
Yeah, this is a concept that's new to me. Getting a discount when you get a lot of something is not a thing I'm familiar with coming from the 40k side.
Well, I'm pretty sure the idea is that they want more stuff on the table. That's kind of the idea. And what better way to do that than to make massive hordes of things cheaper by bringing more of them?
I'm pretty excited to get into this. So, do we want to start with the factions? What are the factions that we're going to go through today?
So we're going to go through, for order, we're going to talk about, because I can quickly talk about Stormcast and Caradron Overlords. And then I also want to talk more in depth about Seraphon, because they're kind of more interesting when it comes to this debate. Stormcast Eternals and Caradron Overlords, you're going more or less behemoths. We don't do hordes. Our biggest unit is 30 Liberators, which counts as a single battle line, and in a 2,000 point game, you need 3 battle lines, and so you would spend half of your 2,000 points with these giant groups of battle line. So it's just easier to bring a big guy and call it a day. And it's the same thing with the Caradron Overlords. Their ships are big, they cost a lot, they don't really have a whole lot in the way of horde units, and it's just easier to go Behemoth. Seraphon, on the other hand, have some really interesting Behemoths and a lot of really interesting smaller units.
Excellent. Let's get into those. What are we looking at for those order Behemoths and horde units?
So first up are your Skinks, and they are pretty much exactly what you said. They are there to get in the way and die. But there's a few really interesting things about them that I think people kind of overlook. So they can go, your normal unit is 10, and they can max out at 40. They are only 200 points for a full unit with the discount, which I think a lot of people really might not realize, especially if they're not Seraphon players. I mean, you're not getting a ton of stuff, but I would pay 200 points for 40 models any day. They can ignore Rend of 1, which means they are guaranteed their 6-up save unless you're getting hit by something which would already probably rend them off the board anyway. And they can actually, when it's their turn to pile in an attack, they can instead choose to withdraw up to 8 inches, which I think is really interesting for such things as like objective games, where you're not really there to actually kill the thing you're charging, but you want to get in their way for, like, say, an objective.
Yeah, it sounds like they'd be really useful to pin something down for a turn and then be able to pull out to take care of another objective. That's a fun mechanic.
Yes. So next up is actually the Saurus Warriors. They are a little bit beefier. They only move 5 inches, but you can actually take War Drums with the models, and this actually doubles their move characteristics. So you can have a unit of 40 guys that can naturally move 10 inches a turn. And the downside of that is that they're not allowed to run or charge in the same turn. Once again, they have the ignore Rend unless it's 2 or better, which is fine because -2 would run them off the board anyway. Which the common theme for Hordes is you bring more stuff, you get more things. All of the models that we're going to be talking about get some kind of +1 to hit or +1 to wound just for bringing 10 extra models. These guys are a little bit more expensive. They come in at 360 points for 40 of them, but you're definitely getting a lot more bang for your buck.
How about the big guys, the Behemoths for the Seraphon? I hear they have dinosaurs with lasers.
So our big behemoth of the day is actually the Saurus Old Blood on Connoisseur. And yes, they do have dinosaurs with lasers, but unfortunately this is not one of them. The dinosaur with laser you're thinking of is the Bastillodon, and he is not technically a behemoth, I believe. But for Saurus Old Blood, he is quite the powerhouse. So he's 12 wounds, 4-up save. He moves 10 to start, and then as he has tiers, so as you beat him up, he gets a little bit slower. The slowest he would go is 6 inches. He has a ranged attack that does D6 attacks, hits on 3s, wounds on 4s, -1 rend, 1 damage, so he can poke stuff at range. Poke a wizard if you want. He has 3 melee weapons, a Sunstone Spear, the clawed forelimbs, and the Carnosaur's massive jaws. And what's interesting about him is that he has an ability called Pinned Down. So you connect with the forelimbs on both attacks, which would be a 3-up, 3-up, so it's pretty feasible. And then you can immediately get +2 to your massive jaws, which would make them a 2-up, 3-up for 3 damage apiece, and -1 rend.
That's some classic claw bite shit right out of D&D. I love it.
He's also got Blood Frenzy. Once he has killed something with its massive jaws, he's able to run and charge in the same turn for the rest of the battle. So he upgrades himself as he kills stuff, which is always what I like to see in my behemoths.
Well, he came hungry, but once he's had a snack, he's ready to go.
He's able to, if an enemy unit takes a battle shock test within 8 inches, this is his Blood Roar ability. So basically, if you're within 8 inches of an enemy unit that's taking a battle shock test, you can roll a dice, and if the result is higher than your opponent's dice, then D3 models immediately flee the unit, as well as any units that would flee from the battle shock test. So he can actually make 1 to 3 models flee on top of what's already fleeing. So he's actually really good at fighting hordes, or even elite units, if you can get them to lower their bravery, or if they're a low bravery unit to start, you can actually wipe them out pretty quick without even hitting them.
Yeah, I can see how that would be really useful.
Since he's a leader, he actually has a command ability also, which further makes him awesome. It's called Ancient Warlord. And if he uses the ability, then until your next hero phase, any Saurus hero within 20 inches attacks in the combat phase, you can pick one of their weapons and add 2 to its attack characteristic.
That's pretty good. I'm sure they have some reasonably saucy heroes that only get an attack or 2 that could really benefit from that.
So, and that pretty much wraps it up for dinosaurs riding dinosaurs.
Moving on, let's talk about some chaos.
Yeah, I mostly play Khorne, but I do dabble with some other factions. What I like about Chaos is that every faction has its horde available, but also has its awesome behemoth. So when we think about Khorne, everybody's favorite horde is the Bloodletter Bomb, which is quite amazing. You can buff these Bloodletters up, who normally only get 1 attack, but you add a Blood Secretor, you add an Exalted Deathbringer, you add a unit of Wrathmongers, you have a Demon Hero behind them. Suddenly, you have 30 Bloodletters that aren't rolling 1 dice each, but they're rolling 3 or 4 each. And, you know, the potent thing there is that if you have more than 20 on the table in the unit, you can add 1 to the hit rolls, so now they're hitting on 3 and wounding on 3. But also, if you have the Demon Hero of Khorne within 8 inches, you can re-roll all hit rolls of 1, and then, to even make it worse, if the hit roll for a Hellblade is 6 or more, it's a mortal wound. So now we have this Bloodletter Bomb that's rolling 3 dice each. That's 30 dice, re-rolling 1s, adding 1 to hit, mortal wounds on 5s and 6s now. So it's pretty nasty. The other side of that, though, is the Bloodletters not the strongest unit, so they die in droves, and with a save of 5 and 1 wound each, you got to get your Bloodletter Bomb to its objective. They have to hit hard once or twice, and then know that they're probably going to be wiped out. The other side of that is, I want to talk about Skarak the Bloodborne as a behemoth. This guy's pretty nasty. He's a 500-point Forge World model. When you look at his War Scroll, he was built to counter the Horde. Let's talk about his stats here. He has 16 wounds, save of 4, 1 missile weapon that does d6 damage, and then he has 2 melee weapons. His Brutal Blades do 2d6 attacks, 3 to hit, 3 to wound, 2 rend. So most hordes aren't even going to be able to save against a 2 rend at 2 damage each. So even on an average roll of 7 attacks, that's still probably 14 damage just with this 1 attack. And then he has Thunder's Hooves, which also adds 6 more attacks. So, yes, he's a beast, but what makes him particularly good against hordes is, first of all, he has a couple special abilities. Towering Horror, he can subtract the bravery of all enemy units within 12 inches. So if you're going against, say, Skaven, or, maybe this doesn't work so well against Death, where their bravery is 10, but if you have a horde with a bravery of 5 or 6, and now you've killed 14 models, and you're subtracting 2 from their bravery, you can be pretty guaranteed your enemy's going to lose some to the battle shock. The other ability that makes him so good against hordes, though, is he also has an ability called Life Eater. So long as he kills 1 enemy model during the combat phase, he immediately heals D3 wounds. So he has a way to replenish his own wounds. But then, even if the horde does manage to kill him, he has a thing called Undying Hate, that you roll d6, and once he dies, every model within d6 inches of Skarak takes 1 mortal wound. And of course, most hordes only have 1 wound. So even upon his death, he's going to do some pretty good damage against the horde. So that's Khorne. But if you look at every Chaos faction, they all have their version of the horde. Khorne has Blood Reavers, Chaos Warriors, Nurgle has the Plague Bearers, so on and so forth. One thing I am kind of excited about as far as a change to the General's Handbook 2017 is that with the Slaves to Darkness, Chaos Warriors now have a horde, a reduced horde points. So you could take 30 Chaos Warriors for 480 points, which you stack those against anything that deals out mortal wounds with their natural ability to fend off mortal wounds on a roll of a 5 or 6. That's a pretty hardy horde there. So what's interesting is Scar X 500 points. The